The sun has left and forgotten me.
Your stories don't define you, but how you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker at Elkins Consulting. I call myself the chief story maker because with my natural StrengthsFinder talents, which are strategic and activator, my top two, I have a tendency to get people to do things they otherwise wouldn't consider doing. And most of the time when they say, I never would have done that if it wasn't for you, it's a good thing, most of the time. Speaking of things that you might not have done otherwise, I highly recommend that if you are looking for a job and you are preparing for interviews, take my job interview storytelling course on Udemy. You can find the information at elkinsconsulting.com. Today's guest, Paige Arnof-Fenn of Mavens and Moguls, came to me via an introduction on LinkedIn, and I immediately knew that this is somebody who understood the power of story. And the questions now in my head are, how did we get there? So, Paige, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Sarah, for having me. I'm excited to chat with you.
Well, I love this idea of mavens and moguls, even though maven technically isn't the word that most people think it is. And only people of Jewish descent or people who speak Yiddish might understand the real meaning of the word. I love the name because, as I mentioned to you, I read the book, The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell many years ago. We're talking like 15 years ago, and it's still sticky. And one of the characters in the book, he talks about the connectors, the mavens, the salespeople. And the mavens are the people who know something about everything. And the most important part of that is how resourceful they are. If they don't know the answer, they are going to find out. So that said, I'd love to start our conversation with the question that I love to ask my guests every time, or almost every time. I would love for you to tell us something about you that most people don't know about you. And this is something not in your bio, not in your resume, not in your proposals that you submit to clients. And the idea behind this is that we have a tendency to anchor people in time based on one thing we know about them. And when I ask you this question, it gives a much more complex vision of you as a human. So, what are you going to share with us?
So there's probably a lot it's not that obvious about me, but I think because I'm Southern and I'm very gregarious and extroverted, I think people just assume that I'm always on. Like I'm kind of a big voice and I'm big presence in a room or in a meeting. But the truth is, I have a lot more kind of introvertedness in me than I think people realize. I definitely need my quiet time. I'm really happy to be alone, a lot. And I think people don't realize that about me. And I definitely know other extroverted, gregarious people who feel very similarly. But yeah, before my husband and I married, I used to take vacations alone and just meet people and hike or travel. I'm very comfortable and really appreciate kind of downtime, alone time a lot more than people might realize.
I totally feel that. I understand that. And what's interesting is that that is not an uncommon thing for people to share as the thing that people don't know about them. And what that says to me is that people aren't looking beyond that. Again, they're anchoring people in time, believing what they see is what they get without understanding the multiplicity of humans. My dear friend Andy Vargo did a great exercise at the No Longer Virtual Summit, which was in Missoula in February of 24, Missoula, Montana. And we had, I think, about 25 people in the room. And he did this exercise where he had a beach ball with multiple colored stripes on it. And he had us write different aspects of who we are on these stripes and Sharpie. And then we would hold it up to the people at the table, and you can only see two, maybe part of a third stripe. I thought that was such a brilliant exercise because so many people say, I think it would surprise people to know A. So I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it's a great analogy or metaphor for life because yeah, in a I'm not nervous to go into a crowded room for networking or there are a lot of things where people just assume I'm very confident, very outgoing, and that's all true. But I could curl up with a book and turn off the phone and
Mm-hmm.
just be very happy for a weekend doing nothing.
Yeah, that's funny. I feel like I can really appreciate my solitary time for sure, but I can't do nothing. I maybe it's my hyperactive side of me, but when I can sit and read a book if it's really grabbing my attention. I can read a whole book in a day. That I don't have a problem with. But in general, I get anxious when I'm sitting too long. I can't sit for very long. So I'll actually pick up my book and I'll move to a different place in the house. And then I'll go outside. And then maybe I'll take it with me on a hike on the mountain and sit and read under a tree for a little bit. So I love that. I love hearing other people can do that too, that just enjoy the solitary time. So that said, I mean, a lot of what you're telling me fits into what I know about how you spend your days in terms of your income producing activities. But for our listeners, I would love for you to share what you do without telling us what you do. So you actually gave me an example when we first got on the call, when I asked you, what was the highlight of your week so far? It's only Tuesday afternoon when we're recording this episode. What's the highlight of your week so far? And you told me a story. And you could even share that one if you don't come up with a different one.
So, I love I've picked up some hobbies in the last 2 decades that as a child I was very athletic and very into sports and played a ton of team sports. But as you age, your body and life get in the way where you can't always, go play soccer or, find a dozen people to go hang out with on demand. So because I love being active, I picked up Tai Chi, Qigong, and knitting after my 40th birthday. And so I spend a lot of time every week, and it really reignited during the pandemic. I went from doing it a couple of times a week to sometimes daily because the pandemic just allowed me to kind of hit the pause button, take breaks when everybody was doing everything kind of at home and on Zoom. And I've really kept it up. So I don't know if that answers your question, but those are two things that I do virtually multiple times a week, sometimes every day, that have become really kind of part of me post pandemic. It's like it's kind of an opportunity to both join a community and be kind of zen and meditative, doing things that make me feel better and create things that make me happy. So
two things popped into my head as you were saying that, because these are, when you said meditative, I'm like, oh yeah, I could totally see both of those. They're really, really different activities, but I definitely see how they're both meditative in different ways. Would you consider yourself a pretty calming influence before you started doing those activities?
I think I was way more type A neurotic before I did those.
Okay, that's perfect, because that's where I was going with this. The story you told me was that a client that you had just started a project with, you were just getting it off the ground, called you and said, I know we just did this and I'm struggling. I have a really hard situation here and I need your help. And we talked about what an honor it is when a client reaches out to you and says, you are a person I trust to help me solve this problem. It's such an honor. I have a few clients that reach out to me every time something goes a little bit sideways, just to get my sense of what's actually happening because I'm separated from it. So when I heard that, and now I'm hearing what you're two, I don't know if I could call them hobbies because they're lifestyle adjustments really that you made. I can imagine that contributes to the sense that this client could reach out to you as a calming presence that she trusts. What are you thinking?
I agree with you. I think, I've been doing marketing in my professional life since 1990. And I think when you learn a craft, and I'm sure you feel very similarly in your business, you get good at it. It becomes kind of second nature. It's like intuitive to you. You build on your strengths throughout your career. You accumulate all these experiences that just make you better, stronger, smarter. And I think I've given this a lot of thought about my knitting and my Tai Chi and Qigong. To start something when you're like 40 years old that you have no history in, that it's not playing to any prior strength you've ever exhibited, and be brave enough to start something that you kind of suck at when you really haven't sucked at stuff in a long time, I think is a really important kind of message and life lesson, that you don't just do what you're great at for the rest of your life all the time, where you can be the expert and you can be the problem solver and people can come to you and you can fix things for them and make it go away. That's great, but I don't think that should consume every aspect of your life. And I'm really grateful for the fact that as I was approaching my 40th birthday, I was willing to pick up things that I had no natural talent in, I had no skill in. And to be honest, I'm a pretty bad knitter. I mean, I've made some scarves and dish towels, and I can knit squares and rectangles, but I haven't made a sweater or a hat or anything like that. But I get by. But in Tai Chi, I've been doing it now 19 years, and I think it allows me to both kind of focus and relax in a way that nothing else ever has.
Mm-hmm.
And I just feel so great. And I've brought a lot of people into it who are so happy to have discovered it as well. And so, again, I don't ever think I'm going to master these hobbies or ways of life. I think it will be a lifelong journey and challenge to continue getting better. And, Tai Chi is a moving meditation. And I'm not good at just sitting in a spot and not moving, kind of like what you were saying. I can't,
Mm-hmm.
I never liked yoga, like holding a pose that wasn't comfortable. But because in Tai Chi and Qigong, you're moving and you're getting your chi to flow, your energy flows. For some reason, that just really resonates with me. And I don't feel like I have to be the alpha person. I don't have to be the expert. I don't have to be the best. But if I enjoy it and I love the community of people that I'm doing it with, that's kind of where I am at this stage of my life. So that's kind of a long, convoluted answer. But I would just say, don't be scared to suck at new things.
I love that for many reasons. One is I interviewed a woman, I'm blanking on her name. I have that menopause brain where things just disappear. They'll come back eventually. But I'm thinking of this wonderful woman I interviewed up in Canada on my podcast probably about a year ago. And she said that she had always loved, I think it was the cello. And so she took up the cello and she was terrible at it. And she practiced, but she never really, it never got to a comfortable position for her. And she had this realization that just because you love something doesn't mean you have to do it. Loving to hear the cello being played doesn't mean you have to become a cello player. You can just appreciate when somebody else is playing it. And I think the counter to that is that you don't have to be great at what you choose to do if it brings you some sort of joy or comfort or calmness. And I love that you took this on at around 40, because that's not unusual either for women to hit that point in the late 30s, early 40s to say, whoa, I missed out on all this stuff. I want to try something new. I started singing with the rock band for the first time in my life at 40 years old. And so I love that you took that up and you decided to be uncomfortable. So my question now is, what's next? Because I hit this point, I'm continually putting myself in really uncomfortable positions, performing as a musician. I took up my flute again after 35 years and have been performing with that in front of live audiences, which is terrifying. I'm about to give a 5-minute pitch to do a TEDx next year. All those things. I'm constantly like stepping out and trying this and trying that. What is your thing that you're continuing to explore because you're brave enough to not be great at it?
So great question. And it's funny, I have two nieces in college, and we were talking about their lives. And something I said to them that I really believe is, part of being an adult is being comfortable, being uncomfortable. You have to, I think you have to not let inertia kick in and just stay in your comfort zone, because that's not where you learn the most about yourself and about the world. You have to branch out and stretch. And those growing pains are part of the experience and part of the journey. So you just need to train yourself to be comfortable being uncomfortable, because that's life. And, I know there's a famous saying, which I'm going to screw up, but it's like, a boat is safe in the harbor, but that's not what boats are built for. You got to take it out.
I love that saying.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying. You know what it is. I didn't say it correctly, I'm sure, but
no, that sounded right. It sounded right.
Right. So it's a great question. I mean, in the back of my mind, so as a kid, I was always really good at numbers and kind of strong in science and math. If they didn't call it this back in the 70s, but I would have been a STEM kid for sure. But I always thought of myself as super creative. And the early part of my career, I was very kind of into the analytics and kind of numbers and being kind of a quant person. And I think when I migrated into marketing, I really wanted to balance my left brain and right brain more and bring more creativity into my life. So I think as I'm, 50s going into 60s, I see a more creative period of my life coming. I've always loved books, movies, television, and I'm certainly not going to start a new career in any of those areas, but I could see doing something kind of from the sidelines. Like, I don't know if I'd start a blog or start a podcast or do something around all the creative elements of my life that bring me joy. I mean, again, kind of back to your first question, what do people not know? I love reality television. People think I'm a bit, on paper, I look very serious, very buttoned up, very pedigreed. But if you look at what I read and what I watch on television, it is incredibly pedestrian. Love the Kardashians, love the Bachelorette and the Bachelor series. I watch so much trash TV, you would be shocked. And I could see doing kind of I don't know, East meets West, for all those closet secret nerds out there that have this passion for just turning your brain off and just enjoying the silliness of it. I could see doing something around that and as a next chapter. But again, it might not be my day job. It might just be a side gig.
Well, I'm a big believer in side gigs. I really am. I think they keep us humble and they keep us hungry. They keep us striving. Anytime we take something on that's outside of our comfort zone, we are changing our brain. So, yeah. And what came to my mind was, you're going to write a screenplay. That's going to be your next thing. That's going to be your side hustle. And I have some ideas, but I don't want to share them on this podcast because I don't want to give anyone else this idea. It's all yours, Paige.
Excellent. We
do
will
with
talk
it what you will.
You're stuck with me now, Sarah. You're not getting rid of me. I'm just telling you.
I just have a very strong intuitive feeling about this screenplay idea. So, when you think about that side of your creativity and trash TV, for lack of a better word for it, I mean, it kind of is. It's not like intellectual or anything. I'm guessing though that a lot of that contributes to it's your intuitive sense of what content is going to work in terms of marketing, because you are watching what people are putting out there and gaining a lot of traction on. So maybe, I mean, yeah, sure, it's a guilty pleasure. At the same time, I think of like when I take my hikes, I used to feel guilty when I take a long hike in the middle of the day when I first left my W-2 job, because my husband was toiling away in his office, making the income so that I could try this experiment of being self-employed. And I'd be like, oh, here I am taking another 2-hour hike in the middle of the day with the dog. But I realized after just, I don't know, a couple of months of this, that's where all my greatest ideas come from. And my job is very conceptual, right? It's all brain work. I have to have ideas. I have to give myself that space to bring my best self to my clients and the strengths finder work that I do with teams. And I'm seeing what you're talking about as really similar aspect of your work. You have to find your ideas somewhere. And if that's where you're getting them, it's part of your work, really.
Well, it's interesting because when I worked in corporate, I did a lot of recruiting and interviewing people for marketing jobs. And I would always ask candidates, like, do you know name some books on the New York Times bestseller list, or what movies won at the box office last weekend? Or do you know what one of the top songs was at the Grammys or the Oscar? Which movies won the best picture, best actor, actress? And they would look at me like, what does this have to do with marketing? Why are you asking me these questions? And I think it has everything to do with marketing, because I think the best marketers understand it's about trends and relevance. And, if you're somebody who walks down the sidewalk with your nose in your phone and your ears, your AirPods in your ears, and you're just tuning out everything around you, I don't know how you could be a good marketer, because marketing is about being relevant in the real world every minute. And if you don't know what people connect with and why, you don't have to like Game of Thrones, but you have to understand why it was popular.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to have seen all the top movies or watch all the best streaming shows, but you should know what they are and why people connect with them. Doing branding is about creating an emotional connection with your audience for your product and service. So if you don't have that curiosity, if that's not kind of part of who you are, I think it would not be a great career path for you. And I think the best marketers are the people that are the most curious and ask the best questions and kind of sponge in and are really interested in what makes people tick. Why do they buy that? Why do they not buy that? Why do they like it? Why do they hate it? And I think that's what it takes to be great in this category for a career path. And it has everything to do with getting that inspiration and getting that kind of jolt of, creativity. And so I get it. I know, I can see why you might have felt guilty, but I can also see how you came to the realization that, like, wait a minute, this is kind of essential. Like, my first job after business school, I went to Procter and Gamble. I had been a summer intern there, and I went back and they put me on CoverGirl Cosmetics, which they owned at the time. And I hadn't thought about CoverGirl makeup since I was a teenager. And part of my job, part of what they paid me to do, was read People magazine and Cosmopolitan and Vogue and, get to know the headset of the girls that use the makeup. And I just love, like,
You
you wouldn't have
soaked it up.
totally. I mean, I would come back on Monday with like a million ideas because I had spent all weekend listening to the top 40 radio and going to the gym with Vogue magazine or People. And I had read it cover to cover and I knew who everybody was and why they were famous. And people are like, how do you have time to do all this? And I'm like, for me, this is fun. Like, I
That's
love
part of
it.
your
I can't
job.
believe people
Right.
are paying me to do stuff I would love to do anyway. But I think it's hard to compete with people in any industry, in any category. If it fuels them and it energizes them and it's a drag for you, you're never going to be better than them. You're never going to be successful in that area. So I think you just have to be kind of honest with yourself and just self-aware enough to realize this is playing to my strengths. This is a good path for me to be on.
I love that. And really, I think if you're not curious, like insanely curious about the people you're trying to serve, then you're in the wrong place.
Bingo. Totally. Couldn't
Yeah.
agree more.
I had an experience where a person was saying that they were a storyteller and it was all this stuff on LinkedIn. And I started following them on Instagram. And then I noticed that all of their stories were about them and they didn't include other characters. And I mean, to me, even the mountain that I climb on becomes a character in my story. And I just remember this moment where I thought, well, if you're not curious about other people's stories, how can you really be a storyteller?
Yeah, you're a navel gazer. You're not a storyteller.
It's just fascinating. It's just fascinating. Oh, I love this so much. I'm still stuck in this work for marketing cover girl. I'm stuck here because I am imagining you as a young adult in your like mid 20s,
Yeah, I was
right?
25 when I started.
Okay. And this isn't that far away for you. That's like 10 years, right? It's not like you were 35 or 45 and trying to get in the head of a 15-year-old girl. So at 25, you could still do that. What are
Well,
you?
yes and no. So I was not a real makeup, like my mom was really into makeup. She was very pretty. She was a fashion design major in college. She would not go to the grocery store without a full face of makeup. She wouldn't think of not wearing lipstick or nail polish. I was a bit more of a tomboy and very kind of athletic. And if I had cherry chapstick and mascara on, that was kind of going to a lot of effort for me. So I was a little bit of a fish out of water at CoverGirl. It was a new acquisition for Procter and Gamble.
Mhm.
And I had been a summer intern at P&G in Cincinnati, which is very corporate, very buttoned up, and they hire a lot of MBAs. CoverGirl had been a kind of more friends and family business. And I remember my first week or two on the job going into a conference room for a meeting. And it was a lot of women worked there and a lot P&G in the division I'd worked in, the paper division, it was probably more male than female, but in CoverGirl it was more female. And there were women sitting around the table polishing their nails or trying on lipstick in the meeting. And I was kind of not shocked, but kind of like, I don't know, what's wrong with
A
this?
little uncertain,
Yeah,
right?
what's wrong with this picture? Like I was, this MBA, very, I had all my numbers, I knew all the data, all the facts for the meeting. I had, was prepared for the agenda. And there's these women sitting around the table talking about this new lip gloss or what do you think of this color on me? What do you prefer? Should I do the matte one or the glossy one? And I felt like I was like in a foreign country. And we
I could
did,
totally understand that because I was the same. Like I wore cutoffs, cut off jeans, And I was barefoot through most of college, literally going to class without shoes on.
Yeah. So in a way, going to focus groups with teenage girls, talking about their makeup habits and preferences, it was kind of like me on an anthropological, like studying animals that I was, watching
You're like at the zoo.
their habits and practices because it was so foreign to me. But as you said, it was like an insatiable curiosity. I had millions of questions, and it made me appreciate that it's, knowing the numbers, having the data is important. But again, you have to marry the right brain and the left brain. There has to be an emotional connection for people to really, fall in love with your product or service and to really connect with them on a deeper level. So, yeah, I was young, and I feel like I learned a lot in that job about how to relate to people in a more human way, because I think I was all business when I showed up.
I think that's not unusual either in our 20s of having that kind of mirror. Oh, that doesn't quite fit. So one last question as we kind of come full circle. When you think about that time, you're 25, you're just out of business school, you're sitting at this table with women putting on nail polish and puzzled because it's not your thing at all, and yet incredibly curious about how is this working? That's why it wasn't shocking necessarily, but it definitely generated that curiosity. What did I just land in? What planet is this? I'm curious about the people or person that pops into your head when you think about that time in your life, either in the best way, somebody that in some way mentored you, maybe unexpectedly, or and somebody that inspired you, maybe through spite. Some, you know exactly what I'm talking about, that you
Yeah,
chuckled
so
out loud.
I
So
had a boss who was also an MBA. And so, being the brash, newly minted MBA myself, I would walk into every conference room, every meeting. Again, kind of a big personality, a little bit of a loudmouth, always wanted to make comments and chime in. Even if it wasn't my meeting, excuse me, can we just take a step back here and, let's dig into the numbers. And I was a little bit of a pipsqueak, know-it-all, a little
a little
bratty.
maven like.
Yeah, a little bratty. And I had this boss who was really smart and really quiet, very introverted. We were yin and yang. She would walk in, you wouldn't even notice if she were in the room, very quiet. And at some point in the meeting, she would open her mouth and say one thing, and it would be like the smartest comment of the entire hour-long meeting. And as she opened her mouth, you could almost see people like lean in because her voice was not big. And after she spoke, people were like, that really is the crux of the issue here. I think she really nailed it. And it had such a strong impression on me because I had been there for months, like a bull in the china shop, trying to impress everybody with my smarts and talking about things I really was not as knowledgeable about. But of course, I wanted to share my opinion. And watching her and how effective she was, and it just was like hitting me over the head. Like, you don't, why don't you learn from her? Why don't you try not being the biggest personality in the room, not being the loudest voice? Think really long and hard about the comment you want to make, and maybe just save up for the best comment at a perfect time, and then keep your mouth shut and just take it in and do it a different way that's kind of maybe counterintuitive, but see how that works for you. And it really started to work very well for me. And I took that to my next job, and that kind of became my thing. I just started that way. And I will tell you, a lot of people attribute people are kind of uncomfortable a lot with silence. And when you don't say, it's like when you're not saying stuff, and then they really listen to things when you say something really smart, you get a reputation for being like thoughtful and articulate and concerned and, like all these things that people think about you because you're just being more deliberate and intentional. And it was really a wake-up call for me because I didn't know people like that. At Harvard Business School, you're supposed to talk, you're supposed to raise your hand, you're supposed to get in on the conversation. And that's the way my family was, like being the loudest voice at the dinner table. That's how you got people's attention. So I hadn't really been around people who did it a different way effectively. And it even works with my family, and it even works with, business school friends. Like all of a sudden people are like, that's a really good point she just made. Or, let's go back to that because I think that's really what we're missing here. And all of a sudden, you're getting positive feedback and reinforcement for something that you wouldn't have naturally done, but you see the value and benefit of doing it differently. And I was always really appreciative of learning that in my first job post MBA.
Oh, I wish I had. It took me well into my 30s to learn that. And thank goodness I had a really good boss that helped guide me. And wow, that is such a great story, Paige. Thank you. I so appreciate that. And I think many of us need to remember that there are different circumstances when what you were doing at Harvard Business School was the right thing to do at that time. And just paying attention to your environment, who is in the room, what other talents and knowledge is in the room, and being self-aware enough to know the difference.
And the context really matters.
Of course it does. Of course it does. But we forget, especially in our youth, that
part of it is maturity. You learn as you age. I mean,
Well, yes. And what I think about in terms of that kind of behavior is that self-awareness it's not just understanding myself. It's also when you say, well, that's just who I am, not acknowledging that we have choices about who we are. And yes, I can be abrupt. I can be very direct. And I know the time and the place to back that off, to turn that down a little bit. It doesn't mean I'm turning it off and changing who I am. But it's kind of like if I go to Germany and I don't speak German, I'm going to learn please and thank you. I'm going to learn beer. I'm going to learn bathroom, left and right, maybe. I'm going to learn enough of that language so that I can communicate effectively, so I can get to where I need to go.
Yep, bingo.
It's the same thing. Love it. Love it. Okay. So for our listeners, because we haven't actually talked about what you do, please just a quick description of the work that you do so that when they look you up and connect with you on LinkedIn and check out your website, which listeners, this will all be in the show notes associated with this podcast episode at elkinsconsulting.com.
So I started a global branding and digital marketing firm 23 years ago, and we help organizations find the right words and pictures to tell their story in a compelling way so that they can sell more of their products and services faster. So like you, we're storytellers, we're content creators, and we help them find the essence of them so they can stand out as a brand and not be a commodity that competes on price. So we're very simpatico.
Love it. That's perfect. Thank you. And thank you for your time today. I really appreciate the vulnerability and sharing that you did today. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been great, Sarah. I really appreciate it.
Listeners, now it's your turn. We covered a lot of ground, Paige and I, today. But the thing that just came back to me is I would love to challenge you to take on something that maybe you've always been curious about but never tried. Maybe you won't be good at it. Maybe you'll find that you actually have a natural talent in it. Maybe it's taking a pottery class, throwing clay on a wheel, or hand sculpting things. Maybe it's taking up knitting or Tai Chi. Maybe it's something as simple as walking around your neighborhood in a way that you haven't done before with great intention. I would love to hear what you try, what your experience is with it, and how you felt it drive you step by step out of your comfort zone. Thanks for listening.
That's the time you must keep on trying. Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile.